Welcome and thank you for joining me. This is Laurie of Laurie's Heirloom Sewing. We finally received our pattern. It took about, I think, 8 days from an Amazon link that I will share in the description box below. So this is what we're going to be making, both of these items, the tote bag and the jacket. So we have the instructions, and by the way, this pattern was listed as used, but it appears that this is the original fold. So unless someone took it out, opened it up, and then refolded and pressed it, I don't know, it looks pretty original to me. Okay, and so it is McCall's M4798. If you're interested in locating it. It's not a new pattern, and I did have a little bit of trouble finding it, but what I did basically, my search for this was to type the number McCall's Crafts M4798 into a search engine, and then I just let it decide where I would find it. A lot of the links were dead links, but I did find it on Amazon, so in that particular method. I think there were some on Etsy, but I'm not 100% sure because I was looking for some other items as well. Okay, so my decision on this is to go ahead and cut out this pattern on the XL line. The XL in this particular case for this McCall's pattern claims to be for a size 20-22, but I have often found that McCall's, Butterick, and Simplicity, of those three, well, of all of those three patterns typically run large. And if I just use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on craft items or accessory items like this jacket, it generally works. So that's what I'm going to do. The sizing is not, like, you don't have information about what their idea of a size large is other than the size range 16 to 18, but you don't have actual body measurements. So you might want to try that if you want a really close fit. And I also am not going to do a mock-up. I'm sending this to my sister, who will likely be wearing it over heavier clothes. She tends to be cold even if it's 70 degrees outside. So I'm not too concerned about whether it's going to be a good fit. I don't want it to be too small. It would be better if it were a little bit on the large size, because she will typically wear something like this underneath, or excuse me, over a heavier sweater or a sweatshirt or something like that. So that's my plan, is to just go ahead and cut it out on that XL line. And before I forget, I wanted to mention that when I do the same thing with a Butterick or a Vogue, I don't get the same results. They tend to be a little bit more accurate, we'll say, in their size descriptions or ranges. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut every single solitary piece out, including the tote. Okay. And as we go, we'll be talking about what this actually is. Okay, so this piece right here is the upper left back of the tote. And while that looks small, keep in mind that it is somewhat pieced. And we are doing a chenille finish to the seams where the fabrics meet. And if that is something you're unfamiliar with, I can actually show you in the description here what you end up doing. We have our cutting layout, and then we have directions. Okay, so because we're putting our fabrics basically right sides together for the most part, there will be some seams that will be sewn in the traditional manner with our wrong sides together, but a lot of the front and back fabric join pieces on the jacket and the tote will be stitched with the wrong sides together. And then we end up with exposed seams. And what we need to do is just clip all the seam allowances every 3/8 of an inch. And you need to be very careful not to cut through your stitching. And then we're going to end up kind of rubbing those and shaking the jacket. And if you want to fray the edges of the seams even more, you can machine wash it in cold water and then shake it again before you put it into the dryer. I figured out a long time ago that really all you have to do is just take your fingers, wet them with some water, rub just the seams, and then put that in the dryer. And you'll get basically the same effect without actually having to wash the jacket. I feel like that kind of takes away some of the integrity of the garment. But, so that's what that chenille means. And if that's something that you're unfamiliar with, while we are doing some of this preliminary work, you might want to, check out some other videos and get a little bit more information about what it is and how to achieve that look. There are a number of really good videos out there, and I think it's really nice that there is a pattern option. There may even be others. I don't know. This was the only one that I ran across. Okay, so this is our little applique for the tote. Okay, this is a strap. Now, as far as the strap goes, these are things that you might not want to cut out. You could basically just do a, what are they? They've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inch width of fabric that is probably about 28 inches long. And you could just cut your fabric out that way. You don't exactly have to cut the pattern piece out. And then they also have a guide for the strap. That probably is going to go right in the middle along this center line right here, and will probably be cut from a heavier, like an interfacing or something. So those two things I'm not going to cut out. I don't need to. Now, if I want to, for the tote, I don't have to use a solid single piece of fabric for that handle or that strap. I can piece the strap using scraps or cabbage. That's often a really cute look, and at the moment a little bit on trend. if you want to try to do that, you know, just save out some of the bigger pieces of the fabrics that you're using that you can then put together. This is very interesting. I'm leaving a little extra on the cutting line here because I'm not real familiar with what this is, and I want to make sure that I have some extra room if I need it. It's like a little notched out place on our tote, and I'm not really sure what that's there for. It's the left side. I suppose it could be the boxed corner, but that isn't. I don't know. We'll find out as we go along, won't we? Okay. They're using dots, open dots, and solid dots for measuring and marking, which will be kind of interesting. I do have some more cutting, some finer cutting to do. I'm mainly just doing this to kind of get an idea of how many pieces we have, what we have, where we're going. Okay, so this would be the right side, and it's basically the same thing with that notch. I'm absolutely fascinated by this. Okay, all right. And I'm not using my best scissors to cut this out. I know that seems a little odd for someone who's just getting started with their sewing projects, but paper and anything other than fabric, and sometimes even fabric. There's certain synthetic fabrics out there, man-made fabrics, that can just destroy your scissors. The blade along the edges can be very sensitive and affected very easily by paper, which will really dull your scissors. And don't use the YouTube hack, please, to cut foil to sharpen your scissors. Take them somewhere to be sharpened if you need to hang on to the scissors that you have. A lot of fabric stores have contracts with companies or even individuals who will do an amazing job sharpening your scissors. And if that's not an option and your scissors are dull, you may need to just replace them and then use that pair to cut, you know, wrapping paper, pattern paper, parchment paper, whatever it is that you were cutting and need to use those scissors for. But you'll just find that you're going to be a lot happier and a lot better off if you save your good fabric scissors strictly for fabric. And even if you happen to have two really good pair of scissors that work really well. One could be for your synthetics and, you know, your polyester fabrics, and the other could be for those natural fiber or plant fiber fabrics that you want to use your super sharp scissors on. Okay, this is this is part of the jacket right here. It is the lower left side front. So as you can see, we really and truly are going to be piecing the jacket. And it would be really, if you were going to say make this with, say a floral or something with a larger print, you could easily fussy cut. Oops, because in this particular case, you're only going to cut one of your fabric. So you could truly line this up on your fabric exactly where you want it to show. Like if there's a big rose or a big daisy or, you know, a bird or something right there, you could truly fussy cut to get it right where you wanted it to be. Now mine, the fabrics I'm using are basically just, well, for lack of a better word, calico. They're kind of tossed item fabrics. There's the horses and there's the horseshoes and the Western gear print fabric, and then the inside lining, which for the tote, probably, I don't know about the jacket. I'm almost positive the jacket has to be lined, but I'm using a really light blue baby gingham check. And that is a flannel, which will Chenille really, really well. Flannel is really good at that. Okay. Try not to cut myself. Okay, so this is an applique for the jacket, and obviously this is on the upper left jacket top part right there. And this is the middle right front of the jacket, and again you'll just be cutting one piece, so you could fussy cut that again if you needed to. Okay. And then I'm left with these two strap pieces from that one section, and this is for the tote. I'm just going to leave these the way they are because they're easier to cut out using a rotary cutter and a ruler, but I need those for measurement purposes, so I'm going to set that over there. Okay. This looks like a pocket maybe on the tote. I'm not sure. Because I'm upside down. Let's see what this says. Looks like it's the upper right back of the tote. Okay. Now the reason I'm not cutting absolutely on the cutting line for the tote and for the jacket is I will have to make some adjustments, and I want to have enough room on the pattern paper to see where my cutting line is. If I'm, like I said earlier, if I'm sewing a Vogue or a Butterick, I know I can cut right on that line, right on the pattern cutting line, and it will be exactly the size. In my case, I can't speak to everybody. I have no idea, you know, but for me, those two patterns are absolutely the correct size. And that's not just for my own personal apparel. I've sewn for other people as well, and I've used Butterick and Vogue and used the actual measurements of the person or a size if I was told you know, their daughter was a size 4T. If I made a 4T, that it would fit. So, please excuse me, I do have a sore throat, and we had a snowstorm in Western Washington last night. I'm using the word storm tongue-in-cheek. We had some snow. They were really hyping it. I'll show you. I'll see if I can get my camera to swing that way. Let's see. Can you see the snow? That might be about 2 inches, and that's pretty much it. So yeah. I'm kind of thinking whoop-de-doo. Okay, this is the upper right front jacket, and again, that would be the yoke up here. You could fussy cut if you wanted to. Okay. So as a result, just in case it hasn't occurred to you, but as a result of having kind of a patchwork jacket, there will be a lot of pieces. You won't be cutting multiples of these pieces. You will be cutting one, maybe two at the most. The yoke, no, actually not, because see, this side right here goes down and this side is shorter. So every single piece, I believe, will be moderately different. The basic shape will be the same, but the piece of fabric that you cut out will be somewhat different. So it's going to be very important to make sure that you use your markers on your pattern pieces. Every single one of them. They will be very, very important. You'll need to be matching up shoulder seams, side seams, armhole, arm side, sleeves. So just make sure that you do whatever method works, and that you are consistent, and that you measure and make sure that those marks are in place. It would be very frustrating otherwise. Okay, so this is the lower right front of the jacket. There's a slight variation in the length on this piece. So if you have trouble sussing out which one of those lines is the correct line for your jacket, I would just measure the pattern pieces, the lower right front, the lower left front, and whatever back edges you have, and just make sure they're all the same, which is fairly easy to do. You just make a measurement and then just cut that width or that length, depending on how that pattern piece is going to fit on the fabric. Okay, so now, I'll flip this over. So, okay, it looks like the upper back of the jacket is one solid piece. And it does have a pointed yoke, which is kind of cute. I like that. Okay, that was the one piece I was a little concerned about for a multitude of reasons. One is if you didn't know how to line these two up, you might have a variation in that shoulder seam, but it's a good idea that they have provided you with one solid piece. And you could still fussy cut this, or if you're just using a solid piece of fabric, you could probably just center it and on the fold, which is what I was going to suggest if they only gave you one. But this is actually really good. I'm glad they did that for simplicity's sake. It would be a little bit more difficult otherwise. Okay, they also have provided a stitching line on the back yoke, or the upper back, whatever they want to call it. And that's something you might wish to mark, or if you're doing a mock-up, you'll want that line. So I recommend marking it on your fabric, either your mock-up fabric or your actual fabric. You could, if you didn't want to use friction pen, or if you didn't want to use erasable ink, you could use chalk. It'll wipe off. Okay, so that's what this looks like. Let me move this out of the way so that we can take a look at this. As you can see, there's a lot of markings here on this particular piece, but we're only going to look at this right here. So this on the outer here is the extra large line that goes all the way around. Then the extra large stitching line is this dashed line right here. So we will be stitching there. And then that is, basically that's it right there. Everything else would be our regular seam allowance. And this is the center. So if you wanted to, after you've pressed your pattern piece, which I can't stand it if people don't press their pattern pieces, you could literally fold this in half if that's how you wanted to proceed with this piece, because there is a fold line right there, or a center back line. And you could put that on the fold and cut one, and then you'd have it, open. But I don't recommend that you do that, especially if you're working with a plaid or a directional print, or if you wanted to fussy cut and you could only see one side, and you had a beautiful flower or a scene of some sort, or a horse's head or whatever arranged right here, but then it was slightly off on this side. That just wouldn't look very good. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, and the rest of this one is the lower right back of the jacket. And it does give you the center back right here, so you know where that's going to be, which will help you locate your where your waistline is. So if you need to lengthen or shorten, you'll have that information as well. And that's where your mock-up would come in very handy, especially if you're doing it for yourself. Now if you're stitching for another person, you can do fitting. Have them come in and fit it to them using a muslin. And then that's where you can make your adjustment if you needed to, if it was too short-waisted or too long-waisted. You can check that out there. Okay. All right. And remember, this is where you'll be looking at this line. This is the lower back. So right here is where you would have a hem. So you want to make sure that this piece right here is going to line up with the lower right front, the lower right back. You wouldn't want the lower right front to be 2 inches, an inch, 3 inches, whatever, off, you know, lengthwise. You want these 2 lines on your fabric to be exactly the same, so that when you are finished, your hem will be exactly the same. That's another little detail to pay attention to, especially since we have all of these pieces. This isn't normal. This is not something that we normally encounter when we're making a jacket. Oh, and another thing to point out about this jacket, in case you don't notice, if you're planning to make it, it doesn't have a closure. There's no button, there's no zipper, there's nothing. It's an open front jacket. And I don't think it says that. It just basically says it is a very loose-fitting patchwork self-line jacket, and it has multiple contrasting blocks and appliques. No, it does not mention the fact that there's no closure. I think you're supposed to notice that when you purchase the pattern. And that's something else I'll talk about as I'm cutting out. A valuable lesson I learned from my mom, who was a seamstress for a long time, made an amazing living at it, in fact, told me one time, and I didn't really believe her, but it's true, that if you are looking at a pattern like this, whatever you see on the pattern, whatever that person, even a drawing, but what you see is exactly what you're going to get. So it's important to really look at the details. Like if this being shorter than this would bother you, see this line right here is way down here and this line is way up here. If that would bother you, that's what you're going to get when you make this jacket. Unless you're skilled enough to just flip this and use this piece and have an equal, you know, front or an equal look. But that's my point. Whatever you see on that pattern is what you're going to get. You're going to get that length, you're going to get that look, no matter what it is. So spend some time looking at your pattern and make sure that every little detail is what you want. And also another thing is also make sure that you check the type of closure. You know, I've had people bring me things before and say, I didn't know that, oops, I cut that off. I didn't know that this was going to have a zipper, and I don't want a zipper. I don't want it to have a zipper. Well, it has a zipper. So those are the kind of details that we need to be mindful of and pay attention to. And if you're not sure what that is, you can always find that information on the back. It will tell you what the notions are. And if you see the word zipper, then you know that's going to be a blouse that zips up the back. Or, you know, a shirt that buttons up the back. If you don't see buttons on the front. Okay, so here we go. This is the applique for the jacket. It is the butterfly and the hearts. The hearts are on the back of the jacket, and it's, oh, I'm sorry, I'm watching somebody outside. I hope they don't fall down on the icy road. The heart is right up here on this little section. So, and on the flower right here, this is the little center section that's right there. So I don't need to cut these out. I'm just going to leave those like they are. And we have one final piece right here. Okay. I'm having to go up between two dark lines, and sometimes that can be confusing. I think we're all right. So this would be the lower left back of the jacket. And again, we'd want to make sure that the hem on the left side, lower left, equals the upper left. And we have some more appliques. And I don't know if I've uploaded the video where I talk about doing I have a little cow design from a different pattern that I plan to use on the tote. My sister and her husband raise Angus cattle, and the little cow that I have is not an Angus, it's more of a dairy cow. But she would really love that. So even though she has a horse, she and I grew up around horses, so it's always going to be a horse. But because they now have all those cows, I thought it would be cute to do a cow applique on the tote bag. Okay, this is going to be a sleeve. The sleeves are rather belled. They're kind of wide at the wrist.